We need to talk about this now. It's important. We need to talk about this now. It's important.
I'd rather die than marry that tyrant, she told the stable hand, not knowing it was the Duke. The stable hand didn't look up from brushing the restless gelding when Rosamund Gray burst through the stable doors, her evening gown trailing mud and her carefully arranged hair coming undone. She'd fled the suffocating drawing room at Caldermere Hall where her guardian, Sir Lionel, was finalising arrangements for her marriage to a man she'd never met. I would rather die, she said to the dim air and hay-scented shadows, than marry that tyrant. The stable hand finally turned, his eyes calm and unexpectedly kind in the lamplight. Then don't, he said simply, continuing his steady strokes along the horse's flank. But tell me, what makes him a tyrant? Rosamund stared at this stranger who spoke without judgment, without the patronizing concern everyone else offered, and for the first time in weeks, she told the truth. Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this tale of disguises, unexpected honesty, and discovering who people truly are beneath the roles they play, I'd be so grateful for a like or subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of second chances, hard-won trust, and love built on truth rather than pretense. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments, would you rather know a comfortable lie or an uncomfortable truth? I read every note and it always brings a smile to my face. 1. Rosamund Gray had arrived at Caldermere Hall 3 hours ago with a headache, a trunk full of inappropriate London gowns, and the sinking certainty that her life was no longer her own. At 28, she should have been past the age of arranged marriages and guardian interference. But her father's death 2 years ago had left her in the legal custody of Sir Lionel Gray, a distant cousin with expensive tastes and considerable debts. Sir Lionel had discovered that marrying his ward to Sebastian Rookwood, Duke of Caldermere, would solve his financial problems while appearing to secure Rosamund's future. A perfect match, Sir Lionel had declared during the carriage ride north. The Duke needs a wife. You need security. Everyone benefits. Everyone except Rosamund, who'd spent the past month reading newspaper accounts about the Duke of Caldermere. The Tyrant of Caldermere, they called him. A man who'd raised tenant rents, dismissed long-serving workers, closed a profitable mine, and shut the village out from estate lands they'd used for generations. Cold. Ruthless. Caring more for profit than people. The drawing room at Caldermere Hall had been suffocating. Formal introductions to household staff. Tea with Sir Lionel discussing settlements. The Duke himself was delayed in London on business, expected tomorrow. Rosamund had smiled and nodded and felt the walls closing in. Finally, claiming exhaustion, she'd escaped through a side door into the evening air. Her feet carried her toward the stables without conscious decision, seeking the honest smell of horses and hay instead of perfume and propriety. The stable was warm and dimly lit, several horses nickering softly in their stalls. And there, brushing down a restless grey gelding with patient, methodical strokes, stood a man in simple work clothes. He looked up as she entered, taking in her evening gown and obvious distress without comment. Mid-30s, perhaps. Dark hair, observant eyes, the kind of face that suggested he smiled rarely but meant it when he did. Sorry, Rosamund began. I didn't mean to intrude. I just needed air that doesn't judge, he finished. The stables are good for that. She moved closer, drawn by his calm presence. Do you work here? In a manner of speaking. He returned to his brushing. You're the guest. Miss Gray. How did you know? Small household. Word travels. You're here to marry the Duke. The blunt statement broke something in Rosamund. All the fear and fury she'd been containing for weeks came pouring out. I would rather die than marry that tyrant. The stable hand paused mid-stroke but didn't look shocked or disapproving. Then don't. But tell me, what makes him a tyrant? Everything. Rosamund leaned against a stall door, the words tumbling out. He raised rents on families who farmed this land for generations. He dismissed workers without cause. He shut down a mine that was the village's livelihood. He closed off estate lands people relied on. He rules like iron with no thought for the people suffering under his decisions. The stable hand resumed brushing, his movements thoughtful. Or he's stopping a flood with his bare hands and everyone calls it cruelty. Rosamund stared. What does that mean? If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful for a like and subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories you'd love. It means things aren't always what newspapers claim. Raised rents, or corrected rents that hadn't increased in 30 years while costs quadrupled. Dismissed workers, or removed staff who were stealing. Closed a mine, or shut down a death trap before it collapsed. Sometimes salvation looks like tyranny to people who prefer comfortable lies to hard truths. The defense surprised her. You sound like you know him. I know the estate. I know what it takes to save something that's drowning. He gestured to the gelding he'd been grooming. This horse was abused by a previous owner, beaten until he feared every hand. When the Duke bought him, people said he should be put down, too damaged to save. But the Duke spent months working with him, patient and firm. No cruelty. No giving up. Now look at him. Rosamund studied the horse, who stood calm under the stable hand's touch, no longer restless. That doesn't excuse hurting people. No, but it suggests there might be reasons worth understanding before you choose death over marriage to a man you've never met. The quiet challenge made Rosamund defensive. I've read about him. Everyone has opinions about the Tyrant of Caldermere. Opinions aren't facts. Newspapers sell scandal, not truth. The stable hand finished brushing and moved to hang up his tools. What matters to you, Miss Gray? What would you want in a marriage if duty wasn't forcing the question? The unexpected question caught her off guard. Partnership. Respect. Someone who sees me as a person, not a solution to his problems. I have work that matters to me, a women's reading circle I fund in London, a widow I help support. I want a life with purpose, not decoration. Those aren't unreasonable wants. They're impossible if I marry a man who sees people as chess pieces. Rosamund felt tears threaten and blinked them back furiously. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be burdening a stranger with my problems. Sometimes strangers are safer than family. The stable hand's voice was gentle. Come back at dawn if you want. There's a stubborn mare who needs exercising, and I could use help. If you can handle her, you can handle anything Caldermere throws at you. I don't ride well. Then you'll learn. Dawn. If you're brave enough. Rosamund found herself agreeing, drawn by the challenge and the promise of escape from suffocating drawing rooms. As she turned to leave, lamplight caught the stable hand's hands, clean and carefully kept despite his work, the kind of hands that suggested education and care. What's your name? She asked. He hesitated for just a moment. Sebastian. After she left, Rosamund returned to the house through darkened gardens, her mind replaying the conversation. Sebastian the stable hand had challenged her assumptions, defended the Duke without defending cruelty, and offered help without expecting anything in return. For the first time since arriving at Caldermere, she felt slightly less trapped. In her assigned bedroom, she found her guardian waiting with barely contained fury. Where have you been? The Duke's arrival has been moved to tomorrow evening. You'll meet him at dinner. Formal dress. Perfect behavior. Your future depends on making a good impression. My future depends on marrying someone I don't know for reasons that benefit everyone but me, Rosamund corrected quietly. Sir Lionel's face darkened. Don't be foolish, girl. This marriage secures your position. Without it, you'll have nothing. No income, no home, no protection. And those little charity projects you're so fond of, they disappear the moment you're penniless. Think about that widow you help. Think about your reading circle. They all depend on you having means. This marriage gives you means. After he left, Rosamund sat by the window looking out over moonlit grounds. She was trapped, not by love or even duty, but by the simple reality that refusing would destroy not just her life but the lives of people who depended on her. Unless she could find another way. Unless the Duke proved different than his reputation. Unless Sebastian the stable hand was right about newspapers selling scandal instead of truth. She'd go at dawn. She'd exercise that stubborn mare. And she'd keep looking for the truth beneath the rumours. 2. Dawn came cold and clear over Caldermere's grounds. Rosamund slipped out of the house wearing her most practical dress and sturdy boots, half expecting the stable hand to have forgotten or reconsidered his offer. Sebastian was there already, working as though the stables were his true home. He looked up as she entered, his expression showing neither surprise nor judgment. "You came. Good. I'm not sure why I did. Because you're brave enough to look for truth instead of accepting comfortable lies." He led her to a stall where a chestnut mare watched them with suspicious eyes. "This is Tempest." She was abandoned by her owner, half-starved and terrified. Now she's healthy but won't trust anyone. Your job is to get her to take an apple from your hand. That's all. That's everything. Patience. Respect. Letting her choose to trust instead of forcing submission. They spent the morning working with Tempest and other horses. Sebastian taught with quiet competence, correcting Rosamund's form without condescension, praising small victories without exaggeration. He made her laugh when she slipped in mud, deadpanning, "Caldermere welcomes all footwear. It only punishes pride." As they worked, conversation flowed naturally. Sebastian asked about her reading circle, genuinely interested in how she'd organized it, what books they'd chosen, why it mattered. He listened the way people rarely did, with full attention and thoughtful questions. The Duke closed several subscriptions to London charities, Rosamund mentioned as they brushed down horses after the morning's work. Cut funding entirely. People said it proved his cruelty. Or he discovered the charities were fraudulent. Sebastian's tone was carefully neutral. 3 organizations were taking donations and paying officers without helping anyone. The Duke exposed them publicly and redirected funds to legitimate causes. The newspapers called it tyranny because corruption makes better headlines than accountability. "How do you know so much about the Duke's decisions?" "I pay attention. Estate business affects everyone who works here." "You sound like you defend him." "I defend truth." Sebastian met her eyes. Whether that truth favors the Duke or condemns him. That afternoon, Rosamund joined the household for tea, performing the role of gracious guest while internally counting hours until she could return to the honest simplicity of the stables. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Blackwood, was a formidable woman in her 60s who clearly ran Caldermere with iron efficiency. "The Duke arrives this evening," Mrs. Blackwood announced. "Dinner at 8. Full formal service. His Grace expects punctuality." "His Grace expects a great many things," murmured one of the younger maids. Mrs. Blackwood silenced her with a look. "His Grace expects competence and honesty. Those who provide both are treated fairly. Those who don't are dismissed. It's a reasonable standard." That evening, Rosamund dressed for dinner with trembling hands. This was it. The moment she'd meet the Tyrant of Caldermere, the man she was expected to marry, the Duke whose reputation preceded him like a warning. The dining room glittered with silver and crystal. Sir Lionel waited with obvious anticipation. Other guests, visiting gentry and business associates, filled the formal space with careful conversation. Then the Duke entered. If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful for a like and subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories you'd love. Tall, dark-haired, controlled bearing, cold, unreadable expression. He moved through greetings with practiced efficiency, acknowledging guests with precise courtesy that felt more like duty than warmth. His voice, when he spoke, was familiar. Rosamund's wine glass nearly slipped from her fingers. That voice. Those eyes. The same careful observation she'd seen in lamplight. Sebastian. The stable hand. The man she'd confessed everything to, who'd listened without judgment, who'd taught her about horses and truth. Sebastian was the Duke. The Duke of Caldermere was Sebastian. She'd told him she'd rather die than marry him. Horror and fury and embarrassment crashed through Rosamund in equal waves. Across the candlelit table, the Duke's eyes met hers. For just a moment, something flickered in his expression, recognition and apology and perhaps regret, before the cold mask returned. Sir Lionel made introductions with obsequious pleasure. Your Grace, may I present my ward, Miss Rosamund Gray, your intended bride. The Duke bowed formally. Miss Gray, welcome to Caldermere. His voice was Sebastian's voice. His face was Sebastian's face. But this man wearing ducal authority bore no resemblance to the gentle stable hand who challenged her assumptions and made her laugh. Which version was real? Which was the disguise? And how could she possibly marry a man who'd started their acquaintance with a fundamental lie? 3. Rosamund survived dinner through sheer force of will, performing perfect manners while her mind raced. Every time the Duke spoke, she heard Sebastian's voice. Every time he looked at her, she remembered lamplight in the stables and conversations about truth. He'd lied. By omission, by disguise, by letting her speak freely while knowing exactly who he was. Everything she'd said about him, every confidence she'd shared, had been heard by the man himself pretending to be someone else. The humiliation burned deeper than anger. After dinner, as guests moved to the drawing room, the Duke appeared at her elbow. Miss Gray, might I have a word? Privately. She wanted to refuse, to maintain her dignity through cold courtesy. But Sir Lionel was watching, and making a scene would only worsen everything. Of course, Your Grace. He led her to a small study off the main hall, closing the door and creating a privacy that somehow felt more dangerous than the public performance. You lied to me, Rosamund began before he could speak. You let me pour out everything while pretending to be a stable hand. You made me look like a fool. I made myself a liar, the Duke corrected quietly. And I apologize. You have every right to be furious. Then explain. Why the disguise? Why let me speak that way? The Duke moved to pour himself brandy with hands that weren't quite steady. Because every woman I meet plays a part. They perform whatever they think I want to see. I've had 3 engagements arranged in the past 5 years. All to suitable ladies who smiled and agreed and showed me nothing real. I wanted one honest conversation before society decided our fate. So I disguised myself and waited to see who you were when you thought I wasn't watching. Honest. Rosamund's voice rose despite her attempt at control. You started with a lie. Yes. And that makes me a hypocrite. I know that. The Duke set down his untouched brandy. But I also know that in those hours, I learned more truth about you than I'd have discovered in months of formal courtship. You care about people, about purpose, about maintaining your independence. You fear being erased by marriage. You want partnership, not decoration. Those are real things. Important things. Things you had no right to learn through deception. No, I didn't. The Duke met her eyes with painful honesty. I'm not asking you to forgive me immediately. I'm asking you to understand why I did it, even if the method was wrong. Before Rosamund could respond, shouts erupted outside. They rushed to the window to see chaos near the main drive. A horse had bolted, dragging a small cart, a child visible in the back, screaming. The Duke moved like command itself. He was through the door and running before Rosamund processed what was happening. She followed, reaching the drive in time to see him catch the horse's bridle, his voice calm and certain as he brought the panicked animal to a stop. Staff materialized around him, following orders delivered in that same steady voice. Someone caught the child, a boy of perhaps 6, terrified but unhurt. The Duke checked him personally, his hands gentle, his questions careful, before releasing him to his mother's arms. "Your Grace," the staff called him. "Thank you, Your Grace." The titles rang out clear and unmistakable. Rosamund stood frozen, watching this man who was somehow both the cold Duke and the gentle stable hand. Which version was real? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. Perhaps people were more complicated than reputation suggested. When the crisis passed and the household returned to normalcy, the Duke found Rosamund still standing on the drive. "I'm sorry you had to see that. It was dangerous." "It was brave," she corrected quietly. "And competent. You saved that child." "It's my responsibility. This estate, these people, their safety. That's what being Duke means to me. Not power. Responsibility." Rosamund studied him in moonlight, seeing exhaustion in his face that formal dinners had hidden. The mine you closed, the one they called tyranny, was going to collapse within months. I brought engineers from London. They confirmed structural failure. I closed it before it killed anyone and started retraining workers for other positions. But retraining takes time, and people were angry about lost wages. I couldn't explain the danger without causing panic, so I took the blame and let them call me Tyrant. The Duke's voice was flat, factual. I made the choice that saved lives, not the choice that made me popular. That must have been difficult. Necessary. He turned to face her fully. "Rosamund, I know I started this badly. I know I've lost your trust before I ever had it. But I want to offer you something real now. An exit. If you want out of this engagement, I will end it. I'll handle the fallout, the gossip, all of it. You won't be blamed. Your reputation will be protected. And your guardian's pressure will be removed because I'll make it clear the decision was mine, not yours." The offer stunned her. "Why would you do that?" "Because forcing you to marry me after deceiving you would make me the tyrant everyone thinks I am." His expression was serious, vulnerable in a way the cold Duke facade never allowed. "I want a wife who chooses me, not one who's trapped into accepting me. If that's not you, I understand." Rosamund wanted to accept immediately, to escape back to London and her life. But then she remembered Sir Lionel's threats, the widow who depended on her support, the reading circle that needed funding. Refusing the Duke meant losing everything that gave her life purpose. "My guardian will ruin me if I refuse," she said quietly. "He'll cut off my funds, leave me with nothing. The people who depend on my charity will suffer. I can't sacrifice them for my pride." The Duke's face hardened. "That's not a marriage proposal. That's extortion. That's reality for women without independent means." They stood in tense silence, two people trapped by circumstances neither wanted. Finally, the Duke spoke. "Then stay. Not as my fiancé yet. Just as a guest. Give me 1 week to prove I'm not a tyrant. And I'll use that week to find a way to free you from your guardian's control without destroying the work you care about. Why would you help me?" If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful for a like and subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories you'd love. Because it's right. And because you deserve partnership, not coercion. He paused. And perhaps because in those hours in the stable, I discovered something I haven't felt in years. Hope that real connection might be possible. I don't expect you to share that feeling. But I'm asking for 1 week to earn even a possibility. Rosamund considered. 1 week. 7 days to understand this complicated man who was neither the tyrant of reputation nor the gentle stable hand of disguise, but something more human than either role suggested. 1 week, she agreed. But no more lies. If you wear a mask, I want to know it's there. No more lies, the Duke promised. Just truth. Even when it's uncomfortable. 4. The week that followed proved more complicated than Rosamund anticipated. She'd expected to confirm her worst assumptions about the Duke and leave with justified anger. Instead, she discovered layers of truth that made simple judgments impossible. The Duke didn't hide from her. Each morning, he invited her to join his daily rounds, estate business that revealed the unglamorous reality of managing Caldermere. Account books that showed catastrophic mismanagement by the previous steward. Tenant farms that needed repairs the estate couldn't immediately afford. A household budget stretched to breaking while someone inside stole consistently enough to notice but cleverly enough to hide. The estate was drowning when I inherited, the Duke explained one morning, reviewing ledgers with Rosamund in his study. My uncle was charming and generous and let everything rot underneath. I've spent 3 years stopping the bleeding. Every decision people call tyranny was emergency triage. Rosamund studied the numbers with her practiced eye for household management. She'd run her father's accounts before he died. You're missing funds here. Regular withdrawals that don't match the expense categories. The Duke looked up sharply. You see it too. Someone's skimming. Has been for months. She traced the pattern through several pages. Small amounts, different accounts, always just under the threshold that would trigger review. Whoever it is knows the system intimately. I've suspected but couldn't prove it. The Duke's expression was grim. And I can't accuse anyone without evidence. The staff is already wary of me. They worked together through the morning, Rosamund's organizational skills complementing the Duke's financial knowledge. It felt like partnership, the kind she'd claimed to want, built on competence rather than romance. She also watched how the Duke interacted with people when he thought performance wasn't required. He checked on an injured groom personally, adjusting the man's duties to accommodate healing. He quietly paid rent arrears for a widow without announcing it publicly. He listened to tenant complaints without defensiveness, making notes and promising consideration. You're different than your reputation, Rosamund observed one afternoon. Reputation is what people need you to be so they can fit you into simple categories. Reality is more complicated. The Duke smiled slightly. You're different too. I expected London society, miss. I got a woman who can spot embezzlement in household accounts and isn't afraid to challenge me. Challenge comes naturally. Trusting you is harder. I know. I'm trying to earn it. Mrs. Blackwood, the formidable housekeeper, provided unexpected support. She cornered Rosamund in the hallway one evening with characteristic directness. His Grace is watching you like your sunshine and has been living in darkness. I've run this house 40 years. I know when a man's falling in love. Question is, are you brave enough to love him back? He lied to me. And apologized. What more do you want? Perfection. Mrs. Blackwood snorted. Perfect men don't exist. Good ones who try to do better are rare enough to value. Even the stable offered lightness. Young Tom, the stable boy who'd watched Rosamund's dawn visits with Sebastian, approached her with a grin. Miss, the whole staff knows His Grace was playing stable hand. We're all betting on whether you'll forgive him. I've got £2 on yes. That's manipulative, Rosamund protested. That's romantic, Tom corrected. Duke who rules everything drops it all to muck stables and talk honest with a lady. That's worth £2 of hope. But it was the quiet moments that truly shifted Rosamund's understanding. Evenings in the library where she and the Duke read in companionable silence. Conversations about estate improvements where he asked her opinion and actually listened. The way he remembered small details she'd mentioned, like ensuring her reading circle materials were ordered from London, or quietly arranging continued support for the widow without requiring Rosamund's direct involvement. You're protecting my work, she said one evening, surprised. Of course. It matters to you. That makes it matter to me. Even if I refuse you. Especially then. The Duke met her eyes seriously. Your independence isn't contingent on accepting me, Rosamund. It's yours regardless. On the 5th day, Sir Lionel arrived unexpectedly, his face flushed with anger and wine. The charity gathering is in 3 days. You'll announce your engagement publicly, Rosamund. No more delays. We haven't agreed. You'll agree or you'll be penniless. Sir Lionel's voice dropped to a threatening whisper. Every penny of your father's money that I control will vanish. The widow you help, your reading circle, all of it ends. And I'll make sure society knows you broke the engagement, not him. You'll be unmarriageable, powerless, and alone. Is that what you want? After he left, Rosamund sat in the library fighting tears of frustration. The Duke found her there, took one look at her face, and asked quietly, "What happened?" She told him everything. Sir Lionel's ultimatums, the threat to her charitable work, the public announcement he demanded. "I'm trapped. Even with your offer to free me, he'll destroy everything I've built." The Duke was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke with cold fury that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with her guardian. "No. He won't. Because I'm going to remove his leverage in a way that's legal, permanent, and allows you to make a free choice." "How?" If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful for a like and subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories you'd love. By exposing what he's really been doing with your father's estate funds. The Duke's expression was grim. "Eleanor and I found something this afternoon while reviewing accounts. Your guardian has been embezzling from your inheritance systematically. He's stolen nearly half of what your father left you. We have proof. Documentation that will hold up in any legal proceeding." Rosamund felt cold shock. "He stole from me." And blamed estate costs, charitable expenses, household management. All lies covering theft. The Duke handed her the documented evidence. "At the charity gathering, before he can force your public engagement, we're going to expose him. Not for revenge. For justice. And to free you from his control. That will cause enormous scandal." "Yes. But the scandal will be his, not yours. You're the victim he exploited. Society will sympathize, not condemn." The Duke's voice softened. "And then, after the dust settles, after you're legally free and financially secure, I'm going to ask you properly. No pressure. No coercion. Just honest question from man to woman. Will you marry me? And you'll be free to answer yes or no without consequences." Rosamund stared at him, this complicated man who was systematically dismantling every barrier between them. "Why? Why go to all this effort?" "Because you deserve to choose. And because those hours in the stable showed me what real connection feels like. I don't want a wife who's trapped into accepting me. I want the woman who challenged me, laughed with me, saw through me. I want partnership built on truth. And that requires you being free to say no." For the first time, Rosamund saw past the Duke and the stable hand to the man underneath. Imperfect. Honest in his intentions if flawed in his methods. Trying desperately to do right after starting wrong. 3 days until the gathering, she said quietly. What do we do until then? We prepare. And then we show Caldermere what happens when tyrants meet their match. 5. The charity gathering took place in Caldermere Village Hall, a public space filled with local families, gentry, and business associates. Ostensibly a fundraiser for winter relief, everyone knew Sir Lionel had arranged it as the stage for forcing Rosamund's public engagement announcement. Rosamund arrived with the Duke, aware of every watching eye, every whispered speculation. She wore deep green silk, Lady Blackwood's choice, a colour that commanded attention without apologising for it. Sir Lionel held court near the refreshment tables, already flushed with self-satisfaction. He'd cornered several influential families, clearly spreading his version of events before they could be challenged. The Duke moved through the gathering with controlled purpose, positioning himself and Rosamund where they'd have maximum visibility. Mrs. Blackwood and several senior staff members watched from strategic locations. This was coordinated, deliberate. Finally, Sir Lionel called for attention, his voice carrying across the crowded hall. "Friends, neighbours, I have wonderful news to share. My ward, Miss Rosamund Gray, has agreed to marry Duke Sebastian Rookwood. Let us celebrate this joyous union." Before Rosamund could speak, before Sir Lionel could claim her silence as agreement, she stepped forward. Her voice was clear, steady, carrying to every corner of the hall. "No." The single word fell like a stone into water. Ripples of shock spread through the gathering. Sir Lionel's face went red. "Rosamund, don't be foolish. I will not be traded like property." Rosamund raised her voice slightly, making sure everyone heard. "I will not have my future decided by threats and financial manipulation. And I will not announce an engagement that was coerced, not chosen." Gasps and whispers erupted. The Duke stepped forward to stand beside her, not touching, just present. "My ward is confused," Sir Lionel began desperately, overcome with nerves. "She doesn't understand what she's saying." "I understand perfectly." Rosamund pulled documents from her reticule, the evidence the Duke had given her. "I understand that you've been systematically stealing from my inheritance for 2 years. That you've embezzled nearly half of what my father left me. That you've used threats of financial ruin to control me because you needed this marriage to hide your theft." She handed the documents to Lord Hartwell, the local magistrate, who'd positioned himself nearby at the Duke's quiet request. "These are bank records, account transfers, forged authorizations. Everything documented. Everything provable." The hall erupted. Sir Lionel went pale, then attempted bluster. "This is absurd. My ward is clearly having some kind of nervous collapse." "No," the Duke's voice cut through the chaos with absolute authority. "What's absurd is allowing you to continue exploiting a woman you were supposed to protect. Lord Hartwell, I trust you'll examine those documents with appropriate seriousness." The magistrate was already reading, his expression growing progressively grimmer. This is actionable, Your Grace." "Sir Lionel, I believe we need to speak privately. Now." As officials escorted a protesting Sir Lionel from the hall, the Duke turned to address the assembled crowd. "I want to make something clear to everyone present. Miss Gray was pressured into this potential engagement through financial coercion. She agreed to nothing willingly. Any scandal here belongs to her guardian, not to her." He turned to face Rosamund directly, his voice dropping slightly but still audible to those nearby. "I also want to apologize publicly. I deceived Miss Gray at our first meeting. I disguised myself as a stable hand to observe her character without the performance that usually accompanies introductions to dukes. It was manipulative, even if my intentions were honest. She had every right to refuse me then, and she has every right to refuse me now." The hall had gone absolutely silent. This kind of public honesty from a duke was unprecedented. "However," the Duke continued, "I'm going to ask anyway. Not as an obligation. Not as a duty. Just as an honest question from a man who's discovered that truth matters more than reputation, and that partnership built on respect is worth more than any socially advantageous match." He held out his hand to Rosamund, not assuming acceptance, just offering. "Rosamund Gray, will you marry me? Not because you have to. Not because anyone expects it. Because you choose to. Because we've built something real in these difficult weeks. Because I've fallen in love with a woman who challenges me, sees through me, and makes me want to be better than my worst impulses." Rosamund felt tears threaten. This man who'd started with lies had transformed into someone who offered truth even when it cost everything. "What about your reputation? The scandal of the broken engagement with Catherine, now this public confusion. Let it burn." The Duke's voice was firm. "I'd rather have scandal with integrity than respectability built on coercion. So I'm asking. And I'm prepared to accept no if that's your honest answer." Rosamund looked at this complicated man. Duke who played stable hand. Tyrant who rescued horses and protected widows. Manipulator who dismantled her guardian's power to free her from coercion. Imperfect. Honest. Trying. She thought about those dawn hours in the stables. The conversations about truth and responsibility. The way he'd listened when everyone else performed. The partnership they'd built through account books and estate management. "I have conditions," she said clearly. "Name them." If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful for a like and subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories you'd love. My charitable work continues. Funded, protected, mine to direct. My reading circle, the widow's support, all of it. Agreed. Partnership, not decoration. If I marry a duke, I want voice in estate decisions, not just performance at dinner parties. Agreed. And truth. Always. Even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then. Agreed. The Duke's eyes were steady on hers. Anything else? Just one more thing. Rosamund stepped closer, taking his offered hand. I want the man who brushed horses and challenged my assumptions. Not the cold Duke you show the world. If I'm marrying you, I want the real you. All the complications and imperfections. Something in the Duke's expression cracked. Relief. Joy. Vulnerability. That's all I want to be with you. Just Sebastian. Not the title. Not the role. Just me. Then yes, Rosamund said, her voice carrying. Yes, I'll marry you. Not because I have to. Because I choose to. The gathering erupted into shocked applause. Mrs. Blackwood was openly crying. Young Tom from the stables punched the air victoriously, clearly winning his bet. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing for more tales of mystery, courage, and love that defies expectations. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Would you have had the courage to come back from the dead to expose the truth? What would you do in Phoebe's place? Share your reflections in the comments below. Until next time, may you always choose truth over convenience, and love over fear. This is your storyteller reminding you that the most powerful stories are the ones where people refuse to stay dead when the world wants them buried.